to my kitchen. This is Célinie's kitchen. Sorry, I'm just making some, oh, this is terrible. I'm trying to make some tea. But I wanted to talk to you, to whoever's listening, about gluten-free flours. It's kind of like, I guess it's a popular subject. You can go online and find a whole bunch of things about gluten-free, and you can go into all sorts of restaurants and whatnot, and they have gluten-free stuff. And for some people it's a choice, and that's great. And for other people like me, I react really very strongly to gluten, and I don't know if it's an intolerance or if it's celiac disease. The problem with celiac disease is that it actually destroys the little cilia in your intestines, and can be quite dangerous. But so I react really strongly to gluten. So I've cut it out of my diet about maybe 7 years ago, and it's made a huge difference. I have a lot less stomach aches, and now if I eat something that has a tiny bit of gluten, I'll be sick within like 10 minutes, like really sick. So I avoid gluten, but not to talk about sickness. But so, you know, I'm also vegetarian. I'm kind of not completely vegan, but I can't have unfermented dairy products. And so there's a lot of us who have all sorts of dietary restrictions for all sorts of reasons. And for me, gluten is one. So when I became gluten-free, I still had kids in the house and school lunches, and so I was always making cookies and cakes. In fact, I still make a lot of cakes. I quite enjoy it, and so if there's a party or something, I'll make either a gluten-free or a gluten-free vegan cake for people, and I quite enjoy that. It's for me, it's one of life's pleasures, and I know that baking isn't a life pleasure for everyone, but for those for whom it is, gluten-free flour is something to talk about. So I'll just do a quick video about gluten-free flours, what I know about it. I'm not a specialist, I'm not a nutritionist. What I know is from knowledge and experiment on myself, and from baking all sorts of cakes and cookies for other people and for my kids. In fact, my cookies, when my kids were little, they were used for exchanges. They take the cookies to school and then they exchange the cookies for all sorts of things, which is kind of funny. But I'm just going to make myself a cup of tea, or tisane actually, because you know, baking and cooking in general should be a pleasant experience. So I'll just make it nice and relaxing with a bit of licorice tisane. And I have some herbs as well that I put in there. So when I became gluten-free, I started casting around for gluten-free flours. There's you can get some gluten-free flours that are ready-made. I think Bob's Red Mills makes some. I think if you go to different health food stores, you can find mixes of you know, gluten-free flours all mixed up and stuff. And you know, they're great. And I don't use Bob's Red Mill flour. I find it kind of beany, but a lot of people use it and have really great results. So, you know, if that's what you use or that's what you want to try, that's great. What I started doing is mixing my own flours, and I tried different recipes. And in the last few years, of course, all sorts of groups have come, or, you know, there are all sorts of cookbooks with all sorts of different recipes. And, you know, they often have a mix of rice flours, bean flours, and starches. So those, you know, they all have basic different mixes of that, and often with what we call xanthan gum to sort of give it a bit of oomph. It kind of acts like gluten, kind of binds things together. So most of the flour mixes that you can find either online or in different recipe books will use them. I have a few recipe books with different gluten-free flour mixes. I have this one, which I haven't tried yet. I'm terrible. But I'll show you three that I have used. So I read recipe books the way other people read novels, and I learn all sorts of stuff, but I don't necessarily make the recipes out of them. So this one has a fairly decent, I think they might have two different kinds of gluten-free flour mixes. This one has several, and like I said, I haven't tried them yet. Gluten-free flour power, and you can find like a whole bunch of them. I used one for for a few years, and it was a mix of different kinds of brown rice flour, white rice flour, and corn flour as a starch. But then, of course, corn, it's one of the most irradiated grain that you can get. I don't, is corn a grain? Anyway, you know what I mean. And so I started looking for organic corn flour. You don't call it corn flour. It's corn starch. It's a starch. That's the word I'm looking for. And organic cornstarch is really expensive. So, you know, if you're like me, kind of on a bit of a budget, that became difficult. And then online, someone referred to this recipe that had a mix of brown rice flour, mostly brown rice flour, white rice flour, sweet rice flour, which comes from Japan. You can get it, it's called mochiko, and a wee bit of, I think it's tapioca starch. And what I realized is that I react really badly to anything that has a lot of starch in it. So this one has just a wee bit of tapioca starch, and I started using that mix, and I've used it for about 7 years now, and it's absolutely brilliant. And that mix was on a blog called The Art of Gluten-Free Baking, which you can still find, by a woman called Jeanne Sauvage. Now she's an American, Jeanne Sauvage, sorry. Jeanne Sauvage. She's an American. She doesn't say her name like that, but I don't know how to say it in English because I'm Francophone. So I say Jeanne Sauvage. Anyway, and I just got her book, but I went on her blog. So what I'll do is anyone who's interested in my particular recipe for gluten-free flour, I'll put a link to her blog because she worked hard to create this recipe. And this recipe works great for me. Obviously, you know, I'm not going to eat tons of sweets and cakes and stuff. I mean, that's bad for, you know, anyone. But I can tolerate this this flour mix, and it makes great pancakes. It makes really nice, I use it to make cornbread, muffins, and obviously cakes. So, you know, if I use a recipe from another book, I will not use their recipe for a flour mix. I will use Jeanne Sauvage's. But like I said, you have to figure out what's best for you. Some people like to use bean flour, millet flour, because they, and this is great, because they want their flour to have as much nutrition as possible. You know, I figure I get my nutrition elsewhere. When I'm eating a cake or cookies, I'm not really aiming for high levels of nutrition. Saying that, however, I do like things to taste really nice. So Jeanne Sauvage's flour recipe tastes really good. It's kind of like a blank canvas. And then, of course, you add flavorings. That's one of the things about gluten-free flour. Wheat flour actually has a flavor. So if you make cookies or bread, you know, when I used to make bread, I would make bread, a sourdough, and it would have, you know, wild yeast, flour, and water, and that was it. And it tasted lovely because wheat has a flour. These rice flours, not so much. So they're a blank canvas, and then you would add your chocolate or, you know, whatever you're making your cookies with. Cinnamon's really good as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing about gluten-free flours, they absorb oil, fats a wee bit differently. So if you're using a recipe that was created for gluten-full flour and you're using it with gluten-free flour, you might have to change some of those, you know, you might have to look at the fat and maybe make some changes. But, you know, like I said, there's just so many recipes now for gluten-free stuff online or in recipe books that, you know, you should be able to do it. And, you know, cooking is about experimenting, especially baking. So, you know, you can take your usual recipe and then make it with gluten-free flour and then see how it turns out, and then say, oh, you know, maybe I'll take a wee bit of the fat away. I don't know if you're using butter or coconut oil or whatever, or maybe add a bit more liquid and experiment. And, you know, if you have people around you who get to taste the fruit of your experiment, I'm sure they'd be very happy. So, you know, we just have to feel at ease to try this stuff out. Oh, I never turned my hot water on. So, I'm a bit of a maniac, I think, because I really like I said, I really like cooking and baking. I spend a lot of time in the kitchen. I have an apron on all the time, and I do wash them now and again. But anyway, I always have an apron on. I'm always in the kitchen, and one of the where was I going with that? Apart from saying I like it, so I actually grind my own flours, which kind of puts me in another category. And I'm not saying that it's better, you know. I have a grinder that I've had for about 15 years now. It's an electric grinder. I also have a non-electric grinder, which I've had for years as well, and I still use it for different things. And I have a little grinder here for my flax seeds. So, you know, I probably go to a certain extreme, and I'm not saying it's better to do that. I do like to grind my own rice flours because it's easier to get brown rice, white rice. I buy them in big bags. It's easier to get that from the health food store, and then I store them in my pots underneath here. And then when I need flour, I just grind them up, and it's fresh. And especially brown rice flour, it can go rancid quite quickly. And you know, I'm sure you can find online, you know, they'll say after so many hours, there's so much of the nutrition that is left. But for the same reason that many of us will grind our own spices, or will, you know, get whatever, you know, or take, you know, soak our beans and cook our own beans, the level of nutrition is better and the freshness is better. Sorry, I was drowning myself out with my boiling water. So I was saying that the level of freshness and the level of nutrition is stronger when you grind it yourself. So my grinder, it's actually quite funny. It sounds like an airplane taking off. I've had it for years, you know. I'm sure now they have these silent, powerful ones, but I don't have a silent, powerful one. Well, I have a powerful one, but it's not silent. It sounds like an airplane. So I have neighbors right below. I also have neighbors on two sides, so I can't kind of grind flour at 10 o'clock at night, or, you know, 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. So I try and grind during the day so it doesn't bother anyone. But it's really nice to have this lovely, fresh brown rice flour, white rice flour. I buy the mochiko. I'll show you what it looks like. I buy this from Chinatown. I don't grind it myself, and I use either tapioca starch, or sometimes I'll use arrowroot starch. I buy that as well because starches are quite something. And this is the mochiko, the sweet rice flour that I use. Perhaps you can get other sorts. This one is from Koda Farms. I get this in my town's Chinatown, and I keep it under the counter because, you know, anyway. So because my brown rice flour and my white rice flour are freshly ground, I keep my flour in the fridge. Now I would say if you bought your brown rice flour and your white rice flour and mixed it all yourself, I would say keep it in the fridge as well, because, you know, it will add, it will keep it fresher, and it will add to the nutritional level of your flours. So, and I grind it twice because I try and get it as fine as possible. You know, flour that isn't fine, brown rice flour, white rice flour that isn't fine, it will give a certain graininess to your cookies. And maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's what you don't want, you know. But I tell you, talking about graininess, this kind of flour makes absolutely delicious shortbread. In French, shortbread is called biscuit sablé, and it means, you know, it's basically translated as sand cookies, because it has that texture. So this kind of flour is really good. One of the things I do with my flour, now obviously if I was making a cake, you want everything at room temperature, so I take it out a bit beforehand to bring it to room temperature. So I keep it in the fridge, and when all this is used up, I'll grind some more. But one of the things I do as well, and this is not so much, well, it's for nutritional reasons. It's also because I have problems digesting certain things. You know, and some of you listening might have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. I have a bit of fibromyalgia, well, I have fibromyalgia, and so often I have all sorts of digestive problems. And those of you who have digestive problems know it's kind of like trying to shoot a hitting target, eh? Not that we shoot anything, but so sometimes I can eat something and then the next day I can't eat it, or anyway, it's all that. But one of the things that does help for me is to soak everything. So obviously soak beans before cooking them, but I also will soak whatever I'm cooking for about 8 hours, and then I'll cook it afterwards, and it makes it a wee bit more digestible. Now for many of you that might not make a difference, and you might not have time, and the reality, you know, I did it as well, eh? Single mom, 3 kids, work full time, come home, got to get dinner on the table, got to make cookies for lunch the next day. I didn't have time to soak stuff, and that's fine. Now I have a bit of time. My kids are grown. Well, almost grown. I still make them cookies, but so I have time to mix up whatever I'm making. I just mixed up. I'm going to make some cornbread with this flour. So I mixed it up, and it's just sitting there. I'll let it sit for I'll let it sit till tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow morning I'll add the final bits of ingredients that I left. The leavener. I'll add a bit of baking powder, and then I'll cook it. So you can do that with cookies as well. I've been experimenting. I mix all the cookie stuff except for the leavening, the baking soda, baking powder, whichever one you're using, and then let it sit for 8 hours, and I cover it and I let it sit in a bit of a warm spot, and then I take it out, do the final mix, and cook it and bake it. And that helps with the digestibility of it. It also, it will release a bit more nutrition. It'll make this flour, the brown rice flour, certainly a wee bit softer because it's had a few hours to completely absorb the liquid. So experiment, and if you feel that you don't have the time for it or don't have the need for it, then just go ahead, bake them, have fun, have your house smell all really good, and then enjoy eating them with your friends or your family afterwards. But if you're like me and you have some digestion problems, you might want to soak it. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that you might want to know about gluten-free flours. I will put the link to Jeanne Sauvage's blog so you can get the recipe of the gluten-free flour I use. But like I said, feel free to, if you have one that you've been using for years and you love it, then keep using it. I'll try and make a few other videos. I'd like to make one where I'll bake some chocolate chip vegan cookies with you. Maybe some cornbread. Like I said, I like to cook, and I have probably a few tricks. I know that sometimes my family and their partners will say, "Oh, can I have the recipe for this?" And I'll write it out, and then they're like, "Oh, it didn't quite taste the same." Or I'll write it out and they'll be like, "I'm not quite sure what that means." So I think that maybe doing videos might be a bit easier, might be a bit live. There might be some things that I do that make it easier. Anyway, welcome to my kitchen. I hope you've learned something. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll see if I can answer them. Like I said, I'm not an expert. Maybe I can answer them, or maybe I can't. Maybe someone else who's reading the comments will be able to answer it. This is a bit of a community event. I think the internet is fascinating because it gives us access to so much shared knowledge, and I love that. I think it can also be used in negative ways, and many of us are aware of that. But certainly when it comes to cooking and sharing our passion for it and our love for it, I think the internet's great. So anyway, put your comments, your questions, and I'll welcome you to my kitchen another time.
Dans la cuisine de ces